Hey, Mark Jones, the legend himself. How are you?
I've been referred to in a lot of ways. Legend is probably the least phrase that gets brought up. I'm not even a legend in my own house, Grant. But mate, I'm good. Thank you for asking. All things considered, a lot of people in a lot worse situation than I am. So, yeah, mate, just happy to be here.
Is Helen there, or the boys watching in?
Yeah, the boys and Helen are downstairs. A little bit of homeschooling going on, so you've rescued me from that battle at the moment. I don't know. The kids are digging in against the wall at the moment and getting attacked by their mother to execute some maths. So good to see how that war pans out.
Good luck with it. Good luck with that. So Mark, I asked you here. We linked up. I guess about a year ago now, something like that. And have stayed in touch. You're an awesome guy. You're somebody who knows the sport of rugby inside and out, having played it at the international level yourself, now coaching it at a pretty high level. And I thought you were a fascinating person to talk to as we keep talking to different people, because you're like the definition of international man. You know, you're from Wales, and now you're hanging out on another little island, and you've been to the States. So I thought your perspective, as we talk about understanding coronavirus world, would be really interesting. So tell me where you guys are right now.
Yeah, so we're following on from yourself, picked a job up with the Canterbury Crusaders down in New Zealand, and we're based in a city of Christchurch, which is sort of midway down on the east coast of the South Island, and we're just getting into autumn here at the moment. But it's a beautiful part of the world, very family orientated, and we're getting some pretty good weather considering we're going into autumn, early winter.
Not too bad. And so what I thought would be interesting is, I mean, how much contact do you guys have still? I imagine a bunch with folks back home in the UK. What are things like there? What are you hearing?
Yeah, obviously although my family here, the four of us are tucked away here in New Zealand, we've obviously got all our family back in the UK. We've got some family. Helen, my wife's got some cousins sitting over in Mission Viejo in California, so we've got a little US connection, and obviously we've got a WhatsApp group with those guys, and we keep it up to speed with how they're doing, what their safety's like over in California. But likewise, as you say, back in the UK, things are pretty bleak in certain parts of the country. Virus is spreading pretty quickly, but the latest I'm hearing this week is that they think they've sort of starting to taper off some of those new casualties. There's a few more recovering than they have been, and maybe it's starting to get under control, which obviously hoping not sort of preempting a false dawn here, but fingers crossed, things might head in the right direction from now on.
Yeah, it seems like the news stories are starting to pick up a little bit of that stuff, and hopefully it's not just optimism, but it's a little bit of reality there.
Yeah.
So what I'm curious about really is everyone has their job. They have to figure out how to do it in a world where we can't be around people. How do you train for really high-end sport when in most parts of the world you can't be in the same room as people?
Yeah, well, the fact of the matter is really you don't train as a team. You're training in isolation as an isolated athlete, and there's only so much you can do, Grant, in relation to that, because as you know, it's a team sport, rugby. The interaction between individuals on and off the field is crucial from a preparation perspective, but ultimately the team's performance is based around cohesion. Obviously there's talent involved, but you're hoping that the sum of the parts obviously is not as high as the sum of the whole. You work on that team ethos, and there's a lot of moving parts, and the key to those moving parts functioning correctly and in the right order at the right time is obviously being together on a regular basis. And nothing has challenged sport, I would argue, like this pandemic has challenged it over the last 4 to 6 weeks in particular. So in answer to your question, mate, we're operating on our own at the moment in isolation, unless, of course, you've got a couple of players who are living together in their own home, who are within their own bubble. Obviously, those guys are allowed to interact with each other as long as they don't interact with anybody else outside of that bubble. So what we've done is we've set up some coaching information around how to keep safe mentally and physically through this period whilst New Zealand sits at level 4. the conditioners and the mental coaches within the organisation, and obviously the rugby coaches then are sort of rotating around, taking turns to stimulate the players with whether it be mental health, whether it be physical fitness, or whether it be rugby intelligence. We're obviously setting the boys some challenges that they can do, keep them stimulated, and hopefully when we do get back together, because the one positive thing is this will end. A little bit unsure where the finish line is, but it will end, and it'll be the team that hits the ground running will be the team that gets up to speed quickest, and hopefully will be the team that's the most successful in the competition in the future, whenever that may be.
So practically speaking, you mentioned coaches maybe are moving around. Are they able to move in New Zealand and do some visitation? Or
No moving around. No, what I meant was we're sort of moving around on a weekly, on a daily basis sometimes, about who's going to actually integrate with the players on Zoom or on WhatsApp. So, for example, today, the forwards coach Jace Ryan's organised a special guest from another sport. I won't spoil it by saying who it is in case I ruin the surprise. But so he's got a special guest coming on for a little Q&A with the boys, another international sportsman. So that'll give the boys an opportunity to go and chat to somebody who's in a similar position, can't play their sport, and it's a team sport as well, having to keep their mind fresh, trying to keep their eye keen on what they're doing, whilst obviously managing the psychological frustrations of not being able to get out there and train and work with your teammates. So I think it'll be good to share experiences with those types of guys. And I know our S&C group, strength and conditioning group, have been tremendous at just being really aware about the alert levels, what we can and can't do within those levels, and making sure we stay safe. Because the sooner we get out of this by having good habits, good social distancing, the sooner we can get back to doing what we love.
So do you, imagine you at some point probably have to do an audit of living conditions and facilities for each athlete. Have you guys done things like that? And how are you systematizing something like that? What equipment do they have? What facilities do they have access to?
Yeah, well, our Prime Minister here in New Zealand has done a terrific job. She was really ahead of the game compared to other countries in terms of shutting the country down and making the country isolated from, potential incoming threats. We're lucky we're an island here, so there's only one way in and one way out, or two ways if you consider the ocean as well. And so it's pretty quick to shut the ports and shut the airports down, which limited the amount of external threat from the virus and people, transferring the virus into the country. And I think as it stands today, we've got something like 1,300 cases, but I think there's only been about 3 deaths. Obviously, not underplay the value of death, but compared to countries that are in their thousands, obviously it's a pretty good place to be in comparison. So the government have done a terrific job, and then the rugby organisation, New Zealand Rugby, and SANZAR, which is the Southern Hemisphere organisation that take care of South Africa, Australia, New Zealand and Argentina in particular, they are following those guidelines, and they are setting out pretty stringent guidelines as to what we can and can't do. And so what we've done is we had 2 days to prepare the group really to go from level 2 to level 4. And you're talking about going from level 2, which would be mass groupings of under 100, over 100 limited. Essential travel is okay. Even schools were open at that point. But you were advised not to do any more non-essential travel than you really needed to. You were still allowed to fly overseas, etc. But then within 48 hours, and there was a little bit of a spike in contamination over here, Prime Minister just raised the level to 4. And what she did, she allowed 2 days really for people to get their affairs in order. So what we did as a rugby organisation was we made sure the players that were in isolation got the gym. We emptied the gym at Rugby Park, divided up the equipment between the players, and that was based around some of the players already having a fair bit of equipment if they had a home gym, versus a guy who maybe was living in an apartment with another player. They didn't have a garage, or they didn't have the space. So we had to give those guys, a bit of how can I say, like a medi pack really of essential stuff that they could use to operate, because we're not, we're not allowed at this moment to transfer equipment between people either. So even passing a ball to somebody else is a no-go if they're outside of your bubble. Mm-hmm. So you can imagine, whilst players are allowed to go and and run out on a grass, park, locally to their residence. Our players are all pretty local to the same parks, so we've got a timetable when they go to the parks, what they do when they get there, and make sure obviously there's no cross contamination. So it's a bit of a challenge because we've got public around as well. So the boys have had to show some pretty inventive thinking and have to be really disciplined around it. So it's caused some good thinking, but I actually think we'll probably come out of it a lot stronger as a group off the back of it. Yeah.
So you're obviously fewer people are familiar with how rugby works stateside than they are where you are, but you're going to have some crossover. I'm curious about something like, if you haven't played basketball for a long time, just the feel for the ball begins to slip after a while. And how does that work to help relate to football, baseball, soccer, rugby? How big of a deal is that loss of touch? And how long do you think it's going to take for athletes to recover that level of performance that they're comfortable with?
Yeah, you're spot on, Grant. Particularly when you're talking about hand-eye coordination, as you say, feel and touch, whether it be timing of hitting a baseball, as you say, or even the timing of catching an aerial ball in the NFL from a pass or a kick in rugby. So there's definitely those elements that will fall away from the real sharp edge. So the difference between playing in a championship game, how alert, how aware you are, how your anticipation of reading the ball as well. That comes from the honing skills and practicing them on a regular basis. I know you come from that military background. It would be similar to you guys just, sitting around for 6 months and then saying, oh, okay, guys, just nip yourself over to a foreign country and we need to get this hostage out. And you're just going to go and, we've planned it well, but the difference between planning it and doing it is huge just from the mental side of it. So, there's been two approaches really. We've tried to keep the mental skills going, so making sure that the brain is smart and seeing pictures regularly as what it would see in a match. And then you have to do those hand-eye coordinations that individually with a ball. It's not the same as rugby, but it would be ball grip work, throwing a ball against the wall, juggling, all these types of things that you can do in your own space, which perhaps are not as match specific as they would be as to training with a team, but they've got all the elements that you'll need. That feel of the ball, catching a different size ball, bouncing a ball off a wall, bouncing a ball off an uneven surface. Just all these types of things. So when you go back to the real thing, it's not like, wow, this is like completely new to me. I'm having to learn a new skill again.
So it's reminiscent to me. In some ways, it almost seems like a flashback to what you did as a kid, because you see
Absolutely.
all around the world, a kid, he kicks around a bag of trash and he learns to get eye-foot coordination. Or I can remember laying in my bed with a basketball, just flipping it up and down over and over and over and over, and just getting that touch on my hands.
Absolutely. And, we're lucky here. We've got a great set of coaches, conditioning coaches, medical staff, and rugby coaches. And mental skills coaches, where we incorporate those things into our working week anyway. So although, I'm talking about the guys doing them at this moment in time on their own in isolation, these are things that the boys do in and around their training programs, in the gym when they're training as a team, after training, when the team session finishes, when they go off and do their individual extras, or their essentials, as they like to call them. Guys will go away and kick the ball up in the air to themselves. They'll go away and do some juggling. They'll go away and practice picking a wet ball up off the floor with one hand. So they do all these micro skills as an addition to the rugby session that's planned by the coaches anyway, I suppose. And maybe, at this moment in time, it's just allowing there to be a change in emphasis. So whereas the emphasis is probably 80% team on a working weekday, now it's probably 80% individual, and the 20% is now you just connecting with your teammate, looking at footage of you training before this started, or looking at how other teams have played games, and just reviewing tape and seeing if you can pick up on a few little bits and pieces that you didn't have time to do when you were playing yourself.
So you do that as a staff. You guys are watching a little more film on your players.
Yeah, watching a lot actually, and just in the process at the moment of just putting some individual reviews together. We were only 6 or 7 games deep into our tournament when this sort of got shut down, Grant. So it's a 20+ game tournament. So we were probably coming up to a third of the way through. So it's been a good opportunity for us as coaches just to take stock of where we were. We were tracking pretty well. I think we'd won 5 out of 6. We were sitting top in our pool. We were on a bit of a good roll. So that from a selfish perspective, we were, wanting to continue that momentum. But we're also aware that we had a fair bit that was, there's some fair bit of growth in our team as well. There was a fair few things technically and tactically we thought we could really improve on, which it's always good to work on those things when you're winning. But it's been an opportunity for us, even though we were having a pretty good run at the time, to be really diligent with our review and preview process, and hopefully when we go back into a competition, fingers crossed, rather than having to do that whilst matches are going ahead, we've had the opportunity to do it, in a bit more isolation and drill into the detail a little bit more because we've had the time.
So I want to ask a couple more questions if you'd humor me, and I appreciate it. I know I woke you up early this morning over there, so appreciate that.
You're okay, it's good.
So I want to transition to maybe some lessons for your regular everyday person, because I think there's a lot of crossover from there. But before I do that, you are a Rugby World Cup legend. You competed at this highest level in your sport, and we just saw not too long ago the cancellation or postponement of the Olympic Games. These big international tournaments and events. Help me understand, what's that like as an athlete if you have a huge event, you've tailored your training schedule, you've ramped up physically, mentally, emotionally, and to have a date moved by just weeks even, let alone months or years, what does that do to an athlete's psyche?
Yeah, that's actually been a talking point around some of our mental skills that we've been developing over the last few weeks, just listening to some podcasts of different athletes, and I'm pretty keen boxing fan, and you've seen some high profile boxing matches cancelled recently because can't have mass gatherings, and obviously we don't want to be spreading the virus any further. But you've got guys that have maybe fought 3-4 matches, 5 boxing matches over a period of 2 or 3 years to get themselves in a position to fight for a world title, and all of a sudden that gets cancelled. And you've just highlighted the big one there around the Olympics, where, some people don't, particularly athletes towards the latter end of their career, they just use a regular season to get themselves in shape to peak for that national world tournament at the end of a 2-year cycle, if it's a European Championship, or if it's an Olympic cycle, obviously 4 years worth of preparation. So you can imagine you've gone 3.5 years into your, specific, periodization, so that you're peaking for this maybe 2 races. That's what it could be. Could be peaking for 200 meters worth of running.
Right.
This gets moved. That's a massive psychological blow for you, particularly if maybe it was your last chance. If you're maybe 35, 36, knowing that when I get to 40, that I won't be in a position to be able to compete for an Olympic medal in whatever discipline. I think there's a big challenge for you there to overcome some adversity. And it can work one or 2 ways. You can really decide that that's it for you. You're not prepared to go another cycle. Or actually, you can maybe push back your plans of retirement, or maybe their plans of not peaking for another Olympic Games, and use it to focus on maybe peaking for the following season, because the Olympics might be rescheduled for the following season. Or there may be some pretty big meets, albeit not to the level of an Olympic Games, and decide, well, look, my goal now is, okay, I can't be an Olympic champion, but I'm going to go out next season with a undefeated record, or I'm going to try and break the world record, or use that psychological strength that you've developed through losing one element and push it into another. And I think that's what we're trying to do here. Is we've maybe lost the opportunity to compete for the competition as it stood. But there's going to be a new competition at some point. How do we use the 6 games that we've played and the time that we've had on our own in isolation, the time we've had to think about things both personally and collectively, and how do I make sure that's going to have a positive impact on the next competition that we go into? Because as I said to you, this is not going to last forever. There'll be a point where that what do they call it, that pace car that's holding those racing cars back on a Formula One track, you know, drives off the track and they all go at it again. And that's where we are at the moment. I kind of feel like we're sitting behind this pace car and we're waiting for that flag to drop and that car to get out of the way so we can put the foot down.
So you brought up a couple really interesting things there that kind of help us transition some, because you bring up the idea of, you may have lost this competition that was your main target, but you could try to set a record for the regular season next year. You could set some new goal there. What do you think is the difference? You're going to undoubtedly have athletes, even hopefully not on your team, but there will be some who come out in absolute peak form, and others who you can tell took advantage of their leisure opportunity. What's the difference between those two people, not just athletically, but for any job that's been shuttered during this time?
Yeah, it's a tough one because everybody responds differently to different stimulus. You know, we would have all played in a school team or a college team or even a professional team where you're looking around the changing room and you'll see the coach talking about an element of the game, whether it's the start of the game, you know, halftime or after the match, and he'll be, or she will be, describing a situation in a certain way, whether that be passionately, aggressively, you know, quietly, and you'll see everybody around the room just taking a completely different take on what this individual is saying and how they're saying it, and the same message doesn't always get you know, absorbed in the same way that you or I might absorb it. You know, it'll go through a series of filters based on your personality, your experiences, and you'll take something different from what that person's saying. And there's the same in this situation we're in at the moment. You're going to have players, like you say, who will actually see it as a real positive. They might be 10 or 11 seasons deep into a career and go, do you know what? This will be the best thing for me. It gives me an opportunity to have a little break, evaluate where I'm at, actually spend a bit of time with the family, because I've been away for the last 4 or 5 years touring in the off season and I haven't seen my kids much, and I get the opportunity to sit down with them and do their homework, and they'll come out a bit refreshed. They'll be actually really hungry to get back into it. And then you'll have the other group who will be really frustrated. There'll be young guys maybe who have just got into a squad. They were going really well. You know, they were feeling that, oh, this is my opportunity to get picked up by the All Blacks or get picked up by Wales or Ireland or whatever, and get my cap in the autumn or the summer. And they'll feel that, you know, they've had that taken away from them. So I think it'll be a good opportunity for those individuals to actually learn a little bit about themselves and have some self-awareness about where they are. But I think as a coaching group, it's an opportunity for you to connect differently with those individuals and actually find out a little bit more about these people, a little bit deeper, and find out what makes them tick. Because you can't pull the mask down for long, Grant. You know, the first 2 or 3 weeks, everybody's a bit of a novelty, so everyone's kind of in the same place. But you know, I've noticed now, just reading WhatsApp's groups, seeing who's putting stuff on the you know, videos onto the social media side of it. You know, you can see the guys that are actually, they're getting creative. They can feel that they need to stimulate themselves, but feel like they need to stimulate others. And you've got other guys who you're not really hearing from. They've gone into their shell and they just want the whole thing to be over really quickly. So I think we as coaches are trying to, as I said to you before, we've got something lined up through one of our coaches tonight to try and stimulate the whole group. I've got a few things up my sleeve for a little bit later in the week. So hopefully we'll try and connect with all those guys in some way by varying how we approach this situation with each individual. So as I say, it's an opportunity for us as coaches. We can't learn much about the team and what it's doing on the field at the moment, but I think we can find out a lot about the players and get to know them on a deeper level, which I think long term will put us in good stead. So
that's some of that solid gold there. That folks are looking to take something even from a simple conversation like this. We're asking about the resiliency, the makeup of the individual athlete, and what they're going to do with this. But of course, being the coach that you are, you transition to the opportunity for the coaching staff, for the leader ultimately, and that's going to have parallels in a classroom for a teacher who can't physically be in front of her students anymore, for a manager at a company. You go down the list of any of these places where you can't physically be where your people are. It is a chance to engage in a different way. And you being a great example of a leader like that are seeing that as an opportunity, and fortunately your staff is as well. So if you walk away with nothing else, you've honed your relational skills with your squad. So you'll get back to the technical aspects of the sport, but you know those people better, and you're going to be better skilled at motivating them because you've leaned into this opportunity.
Yeah, and obviously this period at the moment is initially 4 weeks for us, and we're sort of 2.5 weeks, 3 weeks into the isolation period in New Zealand. And it's difficult when you're in your own home, when your teammates can't see you, can't make eye contact with you on a regular basis. So there'll be a time on a rugby field where you won't be 3 weeks apart from each other. You might be 30 seconds, or you might be a minute on your own, stood out on the wing. You've just made a mistake. You're feeling as isolated at that moment in time, with millions of people watching on TV or tens of thousands watching in the stand. You'll be feeling just as isolated as you are now after 4 weeks of lockdown. You're going to need somebody to give you a positive comment. You're going to need somebody to give you some guidance. You're going to need to dig deep actually and realize that actually, okay, my teammates need to support me, but I need to show some toughness here as well and not rely on them. I need to dig myself out of this hole as well. So there's a lot of parallels, I think, between a 4-week pandemic lockdown and actually a 40-second period on the pitch where you've just had a bad incident, or actually you've had a positive incident. You're still remembering that beautiful, catch or that beautiful kick you did 20 seconds before, and all of a sudden you're making a mistake because you're not focusing on the here and now. So I do think there'll be some real, like you just mentioned, some real gold that will come out of this period. But of course, it's not as easy for everybody. Different people will find it more strenuous than others at different stages.
Do you think, I'm curious, do you think the person who would have struggled in that 40-second lapse waiting for something to happen is also the same person who's going to struggle during a 40-day isolation period? Are we likely to see some correlation between the mentally tough in each setting?
Yeah, look, there'll be far more educated and experienced people than I that would know more the detail around the transfer of that individual you're talking about. Is it, does the same individual struggle over a short period of being uncomfortable versus a long period of being uncomfortable? But I would say, there's an old saying, you might have heard this one in Texas, that what's in the cow is in the calf. And I'm a believer that, what you are in a short space of time probably just gets exaggerated and expanded over a longer period. So I'd imagine if you're an extrovert and you enjoy people's company and interacting and getting to know people, being stuck in the house with your own family, which is a terrific thing, by the way, but not being able to interact with somebody over a 4-week period, I'd imagine you're going stir crazy. So I actually like getting out and meeting people. I found it quite tough. Not being able just to go and stop somebody on the street and say, "Oh, how you doing?" or mess around with the boys up the park with the rugby or the football. So I'm be honest with you, I've struggled with it a little bit. I know my wife has. She's probably been worse than I have, especially moving to a new country because we need to build relationships. Kids in school, going around just to stay over at their friends and build those new relationships. We're 4 people really in a country we don't know anyone. So this has created a big barrier for us as a family. So, we've felt the pinch a little bit, but I think what we found is we're actually getting closer ourselves, with each other, and we're connecting a lot more than perhaps we were. We're having to find different ways of communicating with each other because we've got more time to do it. So it's, I'm sure we'll come out of it a lot stronger as well.
Yeah. Well, look, I really appreciate your time. Do you have any parting words of wisdom that you would give to anybody?
No, look, there's wiser people than me who'd be better qualified to do that. But mate, I think it's awesome what you're doing here. We've talked a lot about other people, but I just think the fact that you're taking your time to do this shows your nature, what you're in a gold is. You feel that you want to connect with people and you want to help people through this period. So I think your leadership coming from your background is clearly shining through. Maybe you could have chosen a bit of a better sidekick than me to do it, but I suppose needs must in these tough times. But mate, no, look, I always want everybody to
Ronaldo wasn't available.
Yeah, yeah, exactly. But I just think just be yourself as much as you can. Don't try and be what anybody else wants you to be. Be yourself in these times. If you're struggling, tell somebody. It's as simple as that. If you're struggling, tell somebody, and if you're not, enjoy it. It won't be around forever. I think already the curve is starting to flatten off, and probably we'll be able to turn back in 5 or 10 years and say, remember that time where we got to spend those 6 weeks together in the house? How crazy was that? But actually, how good was it? Because we're all too busy in our day-to-day life, mate, working earning a dollar to pay the mortgage, and we forget about actually connecting with our families. So I actually think this will be a great opportunity to forget the financial side of it, because people are getting hit really hard from that side, and obviously there's clearly the health side of it. But if either of those two things are not affecting you, then just take the opportunity to really connect with your family and treasure it, because it's unprecedented. You'll never get the opportunity to spend this amount of time with your family again. I've no doubt about that. So just make the most of it.
That's you may not think you're wise, but you are wise. We were talking with somebody else the other day. My daughter is now 3.5, and
Wow.
that means, Mark, she never ever stops talking, and it is
what you, she's 33 and a
exhausting.
half, is that what you said? Because she'd be just the same when she's 33 and a half.
Right. It is exhausting, and you know, she wants me to play with her all the time and all that stuff, and it is so tiring, and it's very hard to get other things done. But it hit me. I realized there's going to be a day very soon when I will pay for her to do that. I will wish that she'll want to spend time with me like that, and she won't. It'll be gone. I'll spend the rest of my life looking back, remembering the good old days of what it was like there. And I think you're right. This is a very, very odd time in human history, and it's one that we're unlikely to see ever again, where we're forced to spend 4 weeks up close and personal with our families, and we can't even go shopping. There's no leisure activity we can do that normally would distract us. So it's not even vacation. It's different.
Nope.
It's confinement, and it's a positive thing if we really change our mindset on that.
It's however you look at it, and you know, situations can be really grim and bleak, but there'll always be an opportunity. There'll be an opportunity for some growth in some aspect of your life, and unfortunately, if this one's not through health or through finance, because those areas in particular are being really, really hit hard with individuals, you know, and but what you will have is a great opportunity to cherish those things that don't cost money and they don't take health. It's just being able to spend time with somebody, which you can't put a price on that. You know, that is the non-negotiable, can't buy it, a commodity that some people would around the world would really crave for at this moment in time, being away from their families.
Yeah. Well, Mark, I really appreciate your time. I'm thankful that we got to meet each other, and I'm really grateful that we've been able to stay in touch. I wish you and your family well, and the next time you're here in Texas, we'll take you back to Chick-fil-A.
Oh, yeah, wow. Yeah, man, I've been looking forward to that. That's on my bucket list to do. Man, I had a real special time over in Houston. Really enjoyed it. It was only some 4 or 5 days, but man, it was a great time, and hopefully the people of Houston are keeping well and looking after each other, more importantly, and making sure they're looking after you, because you're a good man, and I'm sure everybody will really appreciate what you're doing with this podcast. Good on you, mate.
Well, that's very kind of you. Well, give my love to Helen and the boys, and let's catch up sometime soon.
It's a deal. See you, mate. Take care.